It's time to head out on the front porch on KFRM. Grab your favorite drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation on the front porch.
Today on the front porch, we have a special guest. Nicole Witt has joined us, Executive Director with the Adoption Consultancy. And we're going to find out what that is all about as we welcome Nicole on the front porch. Nicole, thanks so much for taking time out of what I see from doing a little bit of research is a very, very busy schedule. So we appreciate the time.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me, Rocky.
Absolutely. Let's get a little background. First off, on the Adoption Consultancy. We won't dig deep into it, but kind of give our listeners an outline of what that's about.
Yeah, I tell people that a quick way to get it is that I'm kind of like a wedding planner for adoption, and I guide people step by step through the process. Part of what we do, which is very different than how a lot of people approach adoption on their own, is that we have a nationwide network of agencies and attorneys with whom we work, and we create a customized plan for our clients, and we get them out there and activated with several different places so that they can have a lot more opportunities, so things can go faster than people who just, say, sign up with one agency.
Gotcha. That makes complete sense. Let's give our listeners and for myself a chance to get to know you a little bit. Kind of give us a background of where you grew up, what your family life was like growing up.
Sure, absolutely. I grew up started in Connecticut and then mostly grew up in New Jersey, and now I live in sunny Florida. But yeah, I was parented from the Netherlands, so kind of a more traditional European upbringing, if you will, with a very heavy focus on education. So it was like never any question. You know, I was going to go to college. I was going to go to grad school. Like, that's just what you did. So, you know, that's sort of what got me, you know, my business degree and all the learnings and everything that I sort of needed to be in a position to launch this business when the time came in my personal life that it was, you know, the right thing for me to do. So everything kind of fell into place.
How did you choose your college education and business as a degree? Did you have other interests?
Yeah, so funnily enough, in college, I majored in computer science, which couldn't be any further from adoption, right? And after that, I went into management consulting, and that was actually really interesting because I got to see lots of different kinds of businesses and different industries and how they operate and how to improve them and that kind of thing, and I got to learn that very quickly at a very young age. So that was really a great opportunity. And I decided that I wanted to go more into the marketing side of things. So that's when I went back for my MBA, and I focused in marketing, and I went into a very traditional marketing path after that, large, you know, consumer goods companies. But also at grad school, I had minored in entrepreneurship because I always felt like that's the direction that I would go. You know, the marketing really kind of comes into play a lot, you know, with the work that I do now. So again, when that kind of ended up aligning with my personal situation and my experience with infertility and so on, which I'm happy to talk about if you want to,
sure.
That sort of all came together in starting this work.
So give us a background on where and why adoption is important to you. I think you kind of hinted toward the direction, but give our listeners your background and why adoption became so important to you.
Yeah, so my husband and I went through sort of the whole infertility roller coaster, and as we were kind of exploring our options, we didn't really give adoption sort of the look that it deserved, if you will, because I think we believed a lot of the myths and you know, horror stories and everything that are out there about adoption. So we ended up pursuing a different path. We ended up having our children via egg donor, But during the course of that process, which was a very lengthy process, I got very involved with volunteering for Resolve, which is the National Infertility Association. And I just learned a lot about all the other options, one of them being adoption. And I thought, wow, like this is really different than, what I thought it was. And this is a great option. And people need to understand, that this option they really should give it a look and see if it's the right fit for them. So that kind of just led me into starting this work.
I'm guessing that I'll state the obvious with this question, but the perception of adoption you're trying to change, I would think, because I am guessing the majority have the same thoughts that you and your husband had. Is that correct?
I think so. I mean, there's definitely more information out there about it these days. It's easier for people to find. That was kind of, not to age myself too much, but it was a little bit in the early stages of the internet. It was about 20 years ago. So it's a lot easier for people to find information now, but it's also a lot easier to find scary information and horror stories now as well. So those are kind of two sides to that coin. But yeah, I think, a lot of my clients that come to me, even though they know that adoption is the path that they want to pursue, they do have, a lot of fears about it. A lot of it is based on myths and a little bit of misinformation. So that's still very rampant.
Nicole Witt is our guest here on the Front Porch, Executive Director of the Adoption Consultancy, and she explained briefly kind of what that program is about, and I think we're starting to understand more and more. As a successful consultant in the business world, working with large corporations, when did you make the decision, and how did you make the decision to venture off and be an entrepreneur?
So there were sort of like a few things that aligned, I guess. I was successful in working with large corporations, but I knew it was never the long-term fit for me. It just didn't feel right. I really wanted to, after more than a decade in that field, I really felt like I wanted to do something that mattered more, that had more of a lasting impact, than just selling items.
Right.
And, that kind of aligned with when my husband and I were going through infertility, and it actually also aligned with when we were relocating to Florida, so I was going to have to look for another job anyway. So it just seemed like, this seems to be the perfect thing and the perfect timing, and let's just start it now.
Yeah, and that leap of faith can be scary at times. Was it something you were comfortable with?
No, not at all. It's really scary. Starting your own business is very scary. And I've helped my husband start some stuff on the side, in the intervening years and so on. And it doesn't get easier or less scary. So you're right, it is an absolute leap of faith. You can mitigate that a bit with, a lot of preparation, a lot of saving as much as you possibly can, so at least you feel like you've got a little bit of a cushion there. And then, a lot of it, I think for everybody is, self-doubt, as you get started. So really just sort of working on that side of things. There's the imposter syndrome that people always talk about, and, just really having your self-support, but also your own, support people in your life that when you start to doubt yourself, can really kind of hold you up and push you through.
That's a great way to put it, and very true in so many different ventures or adventures that people go on in their life to have that. The imposter syndrome is a real deal, I think, for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Nicole Witt is our guest here on the Front Porch. We're going to talk more about the Adoption Consultancy. She's got some ideas on some scams that people have in their minds, maybe when they're thinking of adoption. We're going to address that and a whole lot more coming up here on the Front Porch. Again, we're on the front porch today visiting with Nicole Witt, who is the executive director of the Adoption Consultancy. She has been seen many times as someone who has expertise in this field for adoption on many different programs. You may have seen her before or read her work that has been published in many big publications. So we really appreciate the chance to sit down and visit with Nicole about the Adoption Consultancy. And you were talking about taking that leap of faith and believing, making yourself believe you could do this. How long did it take for it to, I guess, get off the ground and then to become what is, now nationwide? There has to be some baby steps to get to the bigger strides.
Right. It actually started rolling pretty quickly because, like I said, I had done a lot of volunteer work in the field for a few years. So, I had kind of all of the connections that I needed with the infertility doctors and the therapists and the Resolve chapters throughout the country and that sort of thing. So I didn't have to start from scratch in terms of building my network, if you will. That was already in place. So that really helped me to kind of get things going more quickly. A lot of the business is word of mouth, just as when people start considering that they want to adopt, suddenly they find all these people in their life who they didn't know, had adopted or were adopted or had placed a baby for adoption. So it's a pretty tight community, and word of mouth spreads pretty quickly. So that really helped me to kind of get things off the ground. I did a lot of speaking engagements, like you mentioned. I've always enjoyed doing a lot of media. So that kind of helped to spread the business throughout the country.
Sure. I have close personal friends several years ago that went through a process of adopting, and it was a long, drawn-out process, and it did finish in a success, and it's been a beautiful thing for their families. But I can only imagine if they would have had a resource such as you guys to kind of streamline, and I don't mean that in a way that you're just, pumping families together, but to when you first maybe consider adoption, I imagine most couples are like, where do we start? And you guys are a great place to start and getting that word out. Is that kind of what you find, though, with families that they've got so many questions, or even how to start the process?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really the best time for people to start with us, when they're kind of at the point of, we know we want to adopt, but that's all we know. Right? And we don't know what to do next or how to do it. So that's where we can really kind of jump in and make things as easy for them as possible and save them as much time and money and stress. I certainly get plenty of clients who've been in the process for a really long time, sometimes 2 years or 3 years, and they just found out about us. They didn't know that our type of work even existed. So then, of course, we try to speed things up for them. But, yeah, when we can start with people right from the beginning, then we can keep them from losing that time unnecessarily.
Would it be beneficial if there are maybe families listening, if they were to go to your website, and we can certainly promote this throughout the show later on too, but to kind of get a feel for what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. All of our information is on there. It's the Adoption Consultancy. So it's a little bit of a long one, but the adoptionconsultancy.com. And yeah, everything's on there, not just information about what we do, but the links to all of our podcast episodes, a lot of the interviews that I've done over the years. So there's a lot of information about adoption in general that they can find on there as well.
TheAdoptionConsultancy.com. Very good. Is there a common first question or first doubts, I guess, when people come to you?
Oh gosh, there are there are so many of them. I think the first thing is that, people who come to me in almost all cases have been through a really tough path through the infertility process, and they're kind of burnt out. They're burnt out emotionally and financially to some extent, and physically. So I think that, that first thing is just helping them to understand that, adoption works, right? This isn't like the next step in a long series of things that haven't worked. It's the first step in a new approach that is going to work for them. And I think it's really important for people to be at that place mentally for adoption to be successful for them. Because if they go into it with that first mindset where, it's kind of very negative and they're kind of just expecting this isn't going to work either, that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and spills over into conversations that they have, with potential birth moms and, things like that. And things tend to not go well for people who are sort of in that headspace. So I think the first thing is really making sure that they've done the work that they need to do to grieve the losses that they've experienced, and to truly be ready to jump into adoption with a positive mindset.
It has to be comforting for these families to work with someone who, although you didn't adopt, you've been through that traumatic time in your life, and you can help them get to that positive outlook and going forward, I would think.
Yeah, I think, again, having been through infertility, it's sort of this lifelong bond when you come across anybody else who's been through it too. And nobody who hasn't been through it can ever truly understand. So, yeah, I think just knowing that the person on the other end of the phone or the other end of the screen, definitely relates and understands. And Jana, who's my profile specialist who works with all of my families, she's an adoptive mom, so she's had that experience. And I also, many years ago now, co-founded the Tampa chapter of Resolve. So I've worked, with families in that capacity for many, many years who are exploring all different methods of family building, who have, all different experiences with it. So that just kind of, adds to what I'm able to share and the support that I'm able to give, because it's not just from my personal experience.
The other part of what you guys do for families is guide them. Obviously, that's a huge help. And you have the resources across the nation, and again, a huge help. But you keep them from going down a path that could be costly and even as traumatic as the path that got them to trying to adopt. Because people are out there trying to take advantage of young families or any family that's trying to adopt, and there are scams waiting around a lot of corners, right?
There are. Now, we do kind of an informal risk assessment for our clients with every opportunity that comes up. So, a lot of these scams, when you know what you're looking for, they're pretty easy to see and to avoid, which is the good news. The other good news about it is that it really doesn't happen as often as people think. So yes, when it does happen, it's devastating, emotionally, financially, and so on. But I think it's really important for people to understand that it's really quite rare. The almost all adoptions go through, and the ones that don't go through, it's usually because, it was an honest change of heart by the birth mom, and she was sort of overwhelmed with emotion after giving birth and realized that, it's just not something that she could go through with. But people who are truly out to kind of just scam the system, that is quite rare, and it is easy to spot. But you have to know what you're looking for. You need to be working with people who can help you figure that out.
And you really help people with that. And can you share some of maybe the scams that people believe are there that maybe isn't happening, like you said, nearly as much as the stories get blown up and everybody wants to, make a big deal of it in media, I'm sure. What are some of the things that people can look out for?
Yeah, so, the one that most people think of first when they think of scams is the financial scam. And there are other kinds of scams, too, which tend to really take people by surprise because it's not what they think of. But the financial scam is kind of the simplest and the most obvious, because the expectant moms do receive money for their pregnancy-related expenses. And legally speaking, that money has to be considered a gift because otherwise you get into like baby buying and that kind of thing. So she always has the right upon the birth to choose to parent the child. So there are some people who take advantage of that, and they're just looking to get the money throughout their pregnancy. But again, it's pretty obvious, right? So somebody who is sincere about placing their child is really going to be much more focused on finding the right family, building a relationship, really trying to envision the child's life with them, making sure she's doing best by the child. And somebody who's out for the money is not going to invest time and energy in that. They're constantly going to be asking for money and having all of these financial crises and needing money very quickly at odd hours when the adoptive parents can't reach the agency to kind of, get them involved, like the middle of the night or weekends or that kind of thing. So that's, that really kind of sets those two types of situations apart.
As I'm listening to you explain those types of situations that are red flags, from my vantage point, as you say those, it's like, well, yeah, those are obvious, but if you're in the midst of trying to have a baby be yours, you probably aren't looking for those red flags because you're so, not desperate, but you're just so wanting this to happen. Is that kind of fair?
Right. Absolutely. You so want it to happen. You've invested so much in time and money and energy that you just don't want to believe that could be happening, right? And if I just give a little more here, give a little more there, maybe this will all work out, right? And so, yeah, people really, they just want it so badly that they can be a little blinded to trusting their gut.
Yeah, it makes sense. That's for sure. I'm going to get another break in. We're talking today with Nicole Witt, who is the executive director with the Adoption Consultancy. Again, that's theadoptionconsultancy.com if you'd like to go check out that website. We'll visit more on the front porch in just a bit. Once again on the front porch, Nicole Witt is our guest. She is the executive director of the Adoption Consultancy. Again, the adoptionconsultancy.com. Nicole, we were talking about some of the scams that can hit these families trying to adopt. There's more that they need to be on the lookout for, and that's a lot of what you guys are there for, is to help them through this process in the slickest way as possible, that they don't feel like they're being pressured or being scammed. What are the other things they can look out for?
Yeah, so, I kind of alluded to that separate from the financial scams are sort of less obvious ones. And one that really people are never expecting is kind of more of an emotional scam. And because it's so surprising to them and they just can't believe it's happening, the adoptive parents really just deny it or don't see it, you know what I mean? So, and it's really quite sad if you think about it. So this is when they are matched or talking to an expectant mom, supposedly expectant mom, if they're not meeting her in person, maybe she's not even. And this woman is not asking for money, so they think, well, it can't be a scam. She's not asking us for money. But she really just wants that attention, right? And that's why I say it's really kind of sad, right? So maybe she's never been the center of attention before in her life. She's never had people caring about her well-being, willing to help her out and support her through a difficult time. And that sort of becomes addictive to her. So it really becomes, this emotional scam. And again, it's marked by a lot of drama, a lot of attention seeking, again, a lot of times at odd hours to see sort of how committed you are to giving her the attention that she's seeking and that sort of thing. And, like I said, maybe she's not even pregnant. In some cases, they're not. If they are, when the time comes that they go into labor, they often just sort of disappear. They don't let the agency know or the adoptive parents know. They go to a different hospital than they were supposed to go to or that kind of thing. And again, it's so hard for the adoptive parents to admit to themselves that this is happening because it's just so surprising and so unusual. But again, if you're on the lookout for it, you can kind of know what to expect. And it's just so important for people to trust their gut throughout this process.
As you're telling these stories, adoptive parents, but I'm guessing that also would include adoptive grandparents because, we just had a grandbaby. It'll be 2 in this next May. And we just, over the moon, obviously. But I can see that happening to an entire family, not just the adoptive parents could be taken advantage of.
Yeah, and usually it's just the adoptive parents that are having the conversations and the interaction with the expectant mom, but that doesn't mean that other people aren't involved and don't have emotions at risk, for sure.
Yeah. What are other things that adoptive parents need to be on the lookout that you guide them through?
The third kind of big category of scams, if you will, is what we kind of call the phantom birth mother. And it's really where there's no pregnancy, there's no reality to this situation. And it is sort of just that true definition of a scam. And this sometimes happens more with international cases where, people will hear from somebody who's supposedly overseas, and I have this child that I need to place for adoption right away, and I need airfare or I need money for a visa or that kind of thing. And again, when I'm saying it to you, you're probably like, oh my gosh, who would fall for that, right? But it's surprising that people really do because, again, they just want it to be true so badly. So that happens a lot with kind of these international stories. But it can happen with domestic as well. People send ultrasound pictures that they can find online, and that they can doctor up. And all this information that's just completely fake, and there is no person and there is no pregnancy. So again, there are ways to look out for that when you receive pictures like that. There are ways to confirm whether they came from the actual doctor versus if it's a public picture floating around on the internet. You can look at, IP addresses for, are they coming from where they say they're coming from, things like that. And you don't want to have to be sort of this detective all the time. But if there are suspicions coming up, there are ways to either, confirm or disconfirm your suspicion. Again, the vast majority of the time, none of this stuff is going on, and if it feels right, you can almost always trust your gut on that as well.
Right.
But I just think it's important for people to know that there are ways that they can protect themselves.
Yeah, and I guess many of us are naive to what the world can do because you just can't imagine someone putting others through this. And I think that's part of why the scams work because, first off, you want it to happen so badly. But secondly, you're thinking this is a mom. There's no way that – anyway, I can see how it can happen very easily if people aren't aware, I guess, is the biggest thing.
Right. But, yeah, again, I think the important point is that things usually go through people often, to one extent or another, depending on kind of what relationship everybody's looking for. There's some contact between the adoptive parents and the expectant mom during the course of the pregnancy. It often turns into a really beautiful relationship that often really surprises everyone involved. and it can just be, a really wonderful process.
Is there a screening process that, I'm guessing there has to be some sort of screening process. How does that work?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I have a network of agencies and attorneys. So I'm not actually working directly with the expectant moms or matching them with adoptive parents. That is for the agencies and attorneys to do. And they do have a screening process, for that. And of course, they all sort of have their own. But that's why I think it's, with more and more things going digital and COVID kind of accelerated that. I still think it's so important for people to work with places that are meeting with the expectant moms in person, developing that face-to-face relationship with her, because that just adds that extra layer of confidence, to all the information that they're receiving from her. And, the social workers can go to her doctor's visits with her, and get all that information firsthand. So that's all part of the screening process as well.
Gotcha. I'm going to get one more break in, Nicole. It's fascinating to hear the stories, to understand, the red flags, and for adoptive parents to get through the process and come out on the other end. As you said, so many beautiful stories, more often than the other case. Certainly is the norm, but it's fascinating to hear the stories. We're going to come back and visit more on the Front Porch with Nicole Witt. Back on the Front Porch and visiting with Nicole Witt, as we've mentioned, the executive director of the Adoption Consultancy. If we've got someone just joining us, I thought you gave a great insight into what your program does, your business does. Would you share that again for someone who might just be stopping in?
Yeah, absolutely. I always compare it to being sort of like a wedding planner for adoption and
That's
guiding
a great way to put it, I thought.
Step by step. Yeah, people kind of get it right away.
Right.
But so a few of the things that we do, like I mentioned, we have a nationwide network of agencies and attorneys with whom we work. So we create a customized plan for each of our clients, and we get them activated with multiple different places, so they have more opportunities than if they were signed up with just one, so things can go faster. We also help them create a great profile, which is kind of like a scrapbook that the birth mom uses to select the adoptive parents, so that way when they are presented to a potential birth mom, they have a better chance of getting selected, just by sharing the right type of information that she's really looking to understand to help her make the best choice. As we've talked about when we were talking about the scams, we do kind of a risk assessment with every opportunity that comes up, and we basically kind of hold their hand step by step through the process. Like you mentioned, when people decide they want to adopt, they often have no idea, what the next step is from that. So we actually guide them through, here's what you need to do, here's when you need to do it, here's how you need to do it. And, we just support them all the way through that process.
Yeah, that's super. As the podcast that you have out, the Adoption Consultancy, or the I'm failing the Adoption, the podcast. Yeah, thank you. When did you start that?
So it's Adopting, the podcast, and it's on adopting.com. I started that, I'm not even sure exactly. I feel like maybe in the ballpark of a year and a half ago.
Okay. And what will people find when they go to the website and join the podcast?
So the podcast is geared towards people in the super early stages. So people who are just considering adoption or have just decided that they want to adopt, and really don't know where to start. So, for example, the very first episode is about deciding if you're ready to make that shift from fertility treatments to adoption. And then we, try to address a lot of the questions that people who are early in the process generally tend to have. What does possible openness look like? Who is a typical birth mom? What are some of the basic legal things I need to understand? So it really is to provide that education for people very early in the process.
Well, you can imagine you and your husband had conversations, not necessarily about adoption, but about with your infertility, which you spoke eloquently about earlier in the show, and are very open to sharing information because it's part of what led you to the adoption consultancy that you are executive director of. But you can imagine a couple in that position and starting the conversation in their home. Do they even want to talk with, friends or family about it? Here's a way to actually visit about it, if you will, by listening to details that could help them in a great way on their decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually have an episode about that in terms of sort of how much to share and when, because I think people who've been through infertility have actually lived that. And a lot of us, as we go through that process, share a bit too much up front. And then if the process drags on unsuccessfully, you get really sick of people coming back and asking you how it's going when you have no information to share with them. So a lot of people, when they get to adoption, they've actually kind of learned what works for them and what doesn't in terms of how much they want to share and when. But it is, it is an important point. Some people really benefit from, from having all of that regular support from their circle, and other people prefer to, keep things really close to the vest until, things are further along in the process. But that is an important decision to make up front, because once you share information, it's out there and there's no taking it back.
Yeah, great point. How often does the podcast come out?
It varies. It's usually in the ballpark of about once a month or so.
Okay, very good. Would you mind sharing a little bit about Resolve? You've brought it up a couple of times. I know you co-founded the Tampa chapter, so I know it's very important to you. Maybe give our listeners an idea what that organization is about.
Yeah, so it's Resolve. Their website is resolve.org, and it's the National Infertility Association. They do a lot of, great education and support for people going through infertility. They do a lot of lobbying for legislation that will help support people going through infertility. And along with the support, they have support groups, both general support groups as well as several ones with maybe a more specific focus. For instance, maybe a focus group or a support group for men, or a support group for people pursuing egg donor or adoption or IVF, right? And again, with COVID, a lot of those groups went online. So, which is nice, because if you want a larger group, obviously if you're getting onto a nationwide group, you're going to have a lot more people than if you're going to your local Tampa meeting. But there are also some groups that have reconvened in person again for people who do want that smaller, more in-person experience. So there really is something for everybody in terms of what type of support is going to best help them get through the process.
Yeah, that's great work that they do, obviously. The Adopting the Podcast, where can they find that again? What's the website?
So they can go to adopting.com, or they can go to my website, and on the media page, we have all the episodes posted there.
Very good. And that website is theadoptionconsultancy.com. And Nicole Witt, Executive Director of the Adoption Consultancy. You guys obviously do, and it appears obvious to me that you do great work for families that are trying, couples, adoptive parents that are trying to start a family and not sure where to start. I understand that 100%. And as you said, like a wedding planner, you help guide them through the process and make it as safe as you can make it for them. I think that's wonderful work. It must make you. You said you got out of working with big corporations as a business consultant, and you wanted to do something that matters. I think you've found it, Nicole. Would you feel that same way as you've gone through this?
I do. It's definitely incredibly rewarding work. I actually have one previous client. She adopted, it's probably 13 or 15 years ago now. And every year on the day that they match, she calls me.
Oh.
And it's just, it's just so incredibly rewarding.
Well, very good. Continue the good works that the Adoption Consultancy does. Again, theadoptionconsultancy.com. You can find out a lot of information there, or check out the podcast as well. Nicole, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Rocky. I've enjoyed speaking with you.
That's Nicole Witt with us on The Front Porch.